Good morning and welcome. We are really happy to have Dr. Theresa Paterra for the session titled Online Teaching and Learning Techniques in WIDA. And the session is being recorded. If you're tweeting or posting on social media, we welcome you to include @PSMLA1 and hashtag PSMLA21 so we can see and share all you are thinking. Our presenter's Twitter handle, I'm sorry, I didn't get your Twitter handle. Theresa, what's your Twitter handle?
It's just my name, Theresa Paterra.
Okay, thank you so much. And with that, it's your floor, Theresa.
Thank you very much. I'm Dr. Theresa Paterra from Eastern Gateway Community College. I'd like to welcome you. My presentation is on online teaching and learning techniques and WIDA. Let me tell you about the power of language. In the early education of Nez, he was only allowed to speak English in his schools. There were laws that originally forbade the speaking English in schools. But then the laws, luckily, were changed by the Indian Reorganization Act, which allowed a bilingual school environment. Now, at that time, America was fighting the Japanese, and every time they tried to send a military command overseas, the Japanese were able to intercept it, they were able to understand it, and they were starting to win the fight. When Nez was growing up and they found out that the English peers in his schools could not understand him when he was speaking Navajo, he joined the Marines, and they got this idea to create a code in Navajo instead of English and pass these military commands on overseas, and the Japanese could not interpret them because Navajo is very hard to understand. This helped the Americans win the war against the Japanese. This is how important it is to learn a language. And if you can't hear a language, your future is at stake. The education of English language learners has, of course, progressed over the years. We have the Every Student Succeed Act, West Virginia Policy 2417. All of these policies support the English language learners in the classrooms of today. It emphasizes closing the achievement gap on the English language proficiency assessments. And also, in addition, the state boards are supporting digital content now with classroom technologies. So we need to know what that looks like for our ELL learners. How does that affect them and their learning in today's world? So the problem of this study was that despite the federal and state policies demanding digital literacy and English language proficiency within 3 years of enrollment, elementary educators were less likely to be using online techniques, and they were not likely to meet the proficiency in English. The delivery methods that teachers use for teaching and learning have a direct effect on English proficiency. Now, the purpose of this study was quantitative. It was non-experimental. I was trying to determine the statistical differences among the delivery methods and among the ELL student proficiency levels in the 2019 ELPA WIDA assessments among the elementary schools across the tri-state area of Pennsylvania, Ohio, and West Virginia. Now, as we know, English as a second language comes from Vygotsky's and Krashkin's theories of social effects and learning a second language. It revealed that students may use cooperative language as a strategy. They have to be interested in using the language. They have to have low anxiety, and they have to have high esteem. In a social setting, students learn the aspects of receptive and expressive language related to speaking and listening, which can also affect their reading and writing for communication with their peers and even their teachers. Social cultural theory supports the effective vocabulary study, and it says that it should focus on the awareness of phonology, graphology, and morphology. As of 1981, the only requirement for programs in schools is to provide an ESL curriculum that helps students progress towards mastery. And unfortunately, in the tri-state region of PA, Ohio, and West Virginia, English immersion is the predominant language. Blended learning is best described as where online learning and digitally enabled activities are part of the classroom-based course. So I felt the best fit design that would have the outcome possibilities would be a quantitative non-experimental design with a descriptive statistics analysis, specifically a chi-square goodness of fit. We know that the problem was about the differences in frequencies in the categories. They had expected counts. They were relevant delivery methods and proficient levels. It was a quantitative method because it calculated those differences into numerical data. And the purpose was about the categories of the variables. So this fits that statistical goodness of fit. Students can't be randomly grouped. ELL students are purposely grouped by a placement test. We can't control that. Educators are required to use the curriculum that's adopted by the school district, so we cannot control the curriculum. It may or may not include a digital component because teachers have some creative abilities as to whether to use online resources or face-to-face resources. So that's why we could not make this a random experiment. But we still did have a hypothesis to work from. The categories would be unequal as the hypothesis that we were looking at, and these would be backed by those statistical calculations. There was also a high amount of data that we had to work with, and goodness of fit puts that into like simple tables, into frequency tables. So that's why I chose this kind of study. So the research question that we were looking at is the significant differences in the observed frequencies of delivery methods. And I cut it down into two categories. Either the teachers were using more than 30 minutes of online teaching and learning techniques, or they were using less than 30 minutes of online teaching and learning techniques in an elementary ESL classroom across the tri-state area. And we were trying to compare those with the counts of higher frequencies in the 30 minutes or less category. In other words, I was trying to see if it was true that teachers were using more online learning. Now, there was no significant difference in the observed frequencies of delivery methods across the tri-state region. That would be the hypothesis one, and the null hypothesis, and the alternative hypothesis would that there would be a significant difference of frequencies of the delivery methods. The other research question that I looked at is, what was the difference in the proficiency levels? So those were broken down into three categories: proficient, progressing, and emergent. And we were looking at to see if there were lower frequencies in the proficient category. Now, the null hypothesis would that there would be no significant difference in the observed frequencies of the proficiency levels. And the alternative hypothesis was that there would be a significant difference in the frequencies of proficiency levels. Now, investigating significant differences in the distributions of frequencies of English language learners per levels and ESL delivery methods is especially important for second language learners. It can even affect other subject content such as math, science, and social studies. And even in today's virtual global market, some teachers are still reluctant to fully integrate online learning, and therefore educators were expected to be using less online techniques. Now, based on the Ohio ELPA results from 2016 to 2017, there was a 6.1 decrease of proficiency. So it was in all likelihood that the proficiency would continue to decrease. So I wanted to also study to see what was going on in the tri-state area. Because as we know, the students can easily move within the tri-state area. We share a border with West Virginia and PA, so it's so easy for students to hop from one state to another. So it's very important to know what's going on around you. We also predicted that the ELLs would not meet the proficiency standards, especially if the educators don't address the problem and examine those trends of the delivery methods and the assessment results. But by March 13th of 2020, PA, West Virginia, and Ohio closed face-to-face K-12 schools during the pandemic. Educators across the tri-state region had to accommodate and modify critical content area work to fit the new stay-at-home online education. There was additional research done, but I did not include it in my study, that teachers at that time were not proficient in those technologies. So I thought that maybe this could also have been a problem back in 2019 as well, that this could be affecting the reason why these students might not have been proficient, is that the teachers were not proficient in those technologies as well. Now, there was existing research back in 2019 on solely online resources in the general elementary education. And for the higher levels, tertiary English as a second language courses, that there was very limited research for the combination of online educational resources for elementary ELLs. And this was the gap that I was trying to close. There also had never been a study found on the differences in frequency distributions among classroom delivery methods and the proficiency level results, and especially in an elementary setting, and especially across 3 states. So that was the significance of this study. Some of the definitions that some of you might not be aware of are English proficiency. Now that's determined by the student's ability to receive and disseminate language in all 4 domains: reading, writing, listening, and speaking, on an academic level at the same comprehension level as their same age regular education peers. Specific criteria for cutoff descriptors of proficiency levels vary among the states, but they are measured by the annual English language proficiency assessment. A global market is a business setting that has connections in other countries, which produces a demand for personnel who are fluent in a common language, especially English. And a global generation was created when the entire population in 2010 was promoted to learn how to navigate a virtual platform by the creation of the internet and communicate with people across the world. A tri-state region is an area where 3 states are connected by a shared border. One example is the tri-state area of Pennsylvania, Ohio, and West Virginia, where, for example, it's easy to navigate from Burgettstown to Steubenville and Follansbee. When students transfer from another state, it's difficult to determine what ELA standards and objectives have already been met and what delivery methods were provided to help the student with progress and achievement of the English language learning and acquisition. Over 10% of school population in 2019 were ELLs, making them the fastest growing student population in the nation. Olson demonstrated that a new subgroup of ELLs were emerging called long-term ELLs. That's because they still lacked in proficient English skills after 5 years. Skills in reading, writing, listening, and speaking include those receptive and productive modalities such as decoding, encoding, reading comprehension, vocabulary comprehension, phonological awareness, determining the meaning of words and sentences, and fluency. This research that I did helped to add to the literature review done on the previous research, and the seminal research was relevant articles that supported the theoretical and conceptual framework and the background information of ESL, theories of vocabulary study and reading, English immersion, and blended learning. The current literature review added to the supportive subtopics on effectiveness of online resources for education, ESL cross-curriculum strategies, ELL strategies for reading, and accommodations and modifications in a virtual world. The state departments of education of West Virginia, PA, and Ohio were also used to relate the importance of the ELA reading, writing, and listening and speaking proficiencies with the state laws for ELLs in elementary schools. The 2 questions for the research study focused on statistical significant differences of observed frequencies compared to expected frequencies for delivery methods and proficiency levels across the tri-state area. These 2 questions were answered by the data from the chi-square test and the goodness of fit test in SPSS and presented as frequency tables. Now the chi-square goodness of fit test has 3 assumptions: that the variable is categorical, delivery method is a nominal scale, consists of 2 categories, and proficiency level is an ordinal scale with 3 categories. The goodness of fit test assumes there's no relationship between the cases. In this instance, there was no relationship between the categories or presumed correlation between the variables. Due to COVID, I was not able to get an actual correlation, so that's why I had to use a goodness of fit. The last assumption of a goodness of fit is that you have to expect a frequency of at least 5 in each cell, and there was enough data to where the frequency was able to generate at least 5 in each cell. The whole population that this research affects is all students in ESL classrooms across any tri-state region who took the ELPA or the WIDA, contained students in grades K through 12, had proficiency levels 1 through 5, and in this case, it could have affected over 100,000 students by determining statistical differences in distributions. The target population, of course, was Ohio, PA, and West Virginia elementary schools. I focused on grades 2 through 5 because that's when testing occurs, and that's when they really focus on the ELA content area. I had to do it in 2019, so I didn't stack the deck with the teachers who were using the online platform because of COVID. So I made sure I did this for the 2018-2019 school year. And then, of course, they had to have been administered either the ELPA or the WIDA assessment. We were looking for a target population of at least 108 for proficiency levels and 88 for the delivery methods. Due to the data that I collected, there was a 99% chance that I was detecting a correct effect from this study for proficiency levels, and a 93% chance of detecting an effect from the delivery method. So I was able to still gather enough information to make this study relevant to the whole population, my whole population, target population. So of course I used the ELPA and the WIDAs from the 2019 test results. They were collected from the states themselves. Pennsylvania, Ohio, and West Virginia sent me their data. The proficiency levels of the students were collected via a Qualtrics survey from the teachers that were involved, and the delivery methods were also collected from the Qualtrics survey. Now, the ELPA WIDA is obviously reliable because it's a criterion test. It's valid and reliable because it is also monitored by either the ELPA 21 or WIDA consortiums. They're based upon the performance of the ELA composite. And the Qualtrics is reliable because multiple items measured the same variables, which was the teaching and learning techniques of the ELLs in the elementary grades. The instruments were also directly related to reading, writing, listening, and speaking skills, which are obviously tested in those English proficiency assessments. So both instruments were directly related to my study, and that's why I chose them. The delivery methods was the time allotted for the online and learning techniques in the ELL classrooms. As I said before, they were split between either more than 30 minutes or less than 30 minutes. They were answered by the questions 5 and 6 on the Qualtrics survey. As we know, some of the face-to-face techniques that teachers reported were textbooks, worksheets, picture cards, labels, and direct instruction. Some of the online resources that teachers reported were videos, chat rooms, websites, online games, blogs, and digital programs. In SPSS, I just assigned a label for 30 minutes or less or more than 30 minutes and recorded the number of teachers that fell into that category. For the proficiency level, it was strictly the results of the 2019 ELPA or WIDA composite assessment. It was an ordinal category. It was measured by that test. It was automatically calculated by the testing software. It was run by the State Department of Education. So all I did was take their results and then split it up between emerging, progressing, or proficient as determined by the test. Now, no data was collected until I had IRB approval from my college, which was NCU. I also needed a grant permission from the school districts for the research. Some school districts actually required a separate committee that I had to go through to get my research approved. So all of that was done before I even started my study. I had to make sure that I had at least to account for 20% non-participation. So I went over my population. Like I said, I had to at least get 106 people for delivery methods. So I shot for more than 106 to make sure I got, in case people didn't participate, ended up not participating, that I would still meet that 106. And for proficiency level, I made sure I shot for 130 so that I could still gain enough data. The data was collected remotely by emails and the Qualtrics survey. So I used frequency bar charts, pie graphs, funnel charts. I was trying to show a visual representation of the demographic data. So it was easy to see. Obviously, the chi-square goodness of fit was broken down into the frequency tables. So that easily demonstrated the data for that. Of course, we did a hypothesis test. So we were looking for, if we were talking about delivery methods, in order to have a null hypothesis, it would have to be 50% of each category. And for the proficiency levels, it would have had to been 33.33% if it was meeting that null hypothesis. And of course, the chi-square test, you had to have more than 0.5, p equal 0.5 for to support the null, or less than 0.1 to not support the null. The assumptions were that the educators recorded and answered their survey questions honestly, that they recall the information with accuracy, because note this was done 1 year later. So we relied on the teachers that they were accurate and in recalling their responses and recording their responses. So the assumption was also said to be met when the administrators of the test made sure that they administered the WIDA correctly. They were using the training manuals. They were provided separate tests for the reading, writing, listening, and speaking, which created that score of the composite test. Now, of course, the weakness of this study was from the sampling, the causation, and the generalization. I wanted to get more of a sample, but because of COVID, I just couldn't reach enough people, I reached enough for my data, but not like I wanted more, but I reached enough for my data. Of course, we cannot do a direct correlation. So there we can't say that this caused this to happen. That's another weakness of a chi-square goodness of fit. We can't generalize like all ESL across the world. We can't say that. But one of the strong things about using a chi-square goodness of fit is you still have a statistical demonstration of those categories. It is a distribution of the variables. It's non-random. It's purposeful. It comes from experts, which are our teachers who are actually in those ESL classrooms. And it does still have a wide net for a sample size. So those are the strong points of this sample. We had to eliminate the study to grades 2 through 5, because that's who the teachers would participate with me. That's who I was able to get. Plus, those are the same students that are taking the ELPA assessments. So and focusing on ELL, or on English language arts in those grade levels. We made sure that the students that were involved attended the tri-state region. And some of these regions were small districts and only had 1 or 2 classrooms per grade level. So obviously we can't randomly place students, and it would be illegal as well for ESL to try to randomly place students, because you have to do it off of the previous test for ELL. So I made sure all the participants were treated fairly, obviously with respect. If they wanted to remain anonymous, I did that. I did not include any people's names in my study. So therefore, that was also made it anonymous. The study was not started till September 1st, 2020, because that was when I got approval from my IRB. And we also had the consent form was embedded in the online survey, so that therefore that made it easier for our teachers and our state departments of education to consent to the study. And then after 3 years, this will be destroyed according to our North Central University policies of research protection and ethical assurances. The study will be destroyed in 3 years, all the data from it. Now, there's no personal relationship to any of the participants that I have. One bias that might be a part was my background in use of online teaching and learning techniques, but I made sure that I did not use any of my influences on the study. I only reported the facts, and within my literature review, I made sure I fully demonstrated both sides of the coin, teachers for online learning and teachers against online learning. I made sure I had support of each side of the coin. And of course, the data from the ELPA cannot be changed. That's data that comes directly from the state. So everything was just recorded as is. Now to get to the good stuff, the findings. So out of the 137 educators, more educators were actually employed in Ohio than in PA or West Virginia. Only 56 of those teachers were employed in Pennsylvania. Second grade was the most popular grade level that was taught by those teachers. As you see, 79 of the students were in second grade. Out of the 482 school districts in Pennsylvania, more public schools were attended by any other type of school for English language learners. In fact, 380 schools were public, 97 were charter, and there were 4 that were called intermediate unit schools. These are the slides that show the school types by Ohio and West Virginia. In both states, again, public schools were the ones that were most taught amongst the 3 states. PA was the second largest group of participants. Most of the teachers taught second grade, and most of those were public schools. Now, out of those 137 educators, 62 teachers said that they used more than 30 minutes of online teaching, and 75 teachers said they used 30 minutes or less. But when we did the chi-square goodness of fit test, the expected frequency was 68. And as you see, it was less than 0.05. This means that there was no significant difference in the delivery methods. In other words, it was just about equal of the number of students who used online methods versus those who did not. This sample, these tables show the breakdown created by the chi-square goodness of fit, where we see that it's almost equally distributed. There were only 6.5 fewer educators who did more than 30 minutes. So this shows that the effect size is even less than 0.001. The effect size is small, so that means that this data can be very reliable. So when you're looking at this data, and you can see that it's not significant We also looked at the other educators, and we saw in the other states that 65 students or 65 teachers used more than 30 minutes and 72 teachers used 30 minutes or less in the other states. So there was still no significant difference among the educators from the other states that either used online learning or not. So I made sure I broke it down between PA, Ohio, and West Virginia amongst all these teachers. And, you know, as you can see, that they are all pretty relevant, pretty much the same as far as they all were pretty much equal on their delivery methods. So therefore, there wasn't a significant statistical probability that the delivery methods wouldn't be equally distributed if no other factors changed. Now, when we studied the previous trends, we had predicted that online learning would be less. So our trends, it did not fit the trend, but there weren't any more teachers using more or less time with these digital resources. Out of the 25,085 grades 2 through 5 WIDA composite assessment results, 1,577 students were proficient. 16,157 students were progressing, and 7,351 students were emerging. Now, we expected that the highest group of students would be that emerging level. So in Pennsylvania, that was not true in Pennsylvania, but we see that we still have a higher number of emerging students rather than proficient students. So we see that we still have a lot of students that are in that lower level and still need some help. When we look at the tables, we can see that these groups were not equally distributed, obviously. We learned that the effect size was a medium effect size, and that this table is reliable. And we also see here that the minimum expected was 15,584, and the p-value was less than 0.001. So there was a significant difference in that data that showed, you know, that the trend was not supported across Pennsylvania. When you look at the data across all 3 states, though, there were fewer students at the proficiency level than any other level. So when you're looking at the tri-state area as a whole, we can see that the trend does continue if you're talking about the whole tri-state area, because those students were in that lower category. As we demonstrated, public schools are the most attended type across the tri-state area. So when we're looking at considering policies for ELL, standards, curriculum, and materials, we need to focus on those public schools. We need to see what's going on there. We need to figure out about is funding affecting the delivery methods? Maybe also looking at the standardized testing in the ELP and WIDA, like what are the teachers teaching the students versus what is the testing? Because less than 50% of these educators originally in 2017 believed that online learning was effective. So we need to look and see like how are these teachers teaching the ELLs and see if that is having an effect on the students' learning. Because believe it or not, digital learning is here to stay. We need to still keep on using this data to support sustaining digital and online resources because it's not going away. We need to help our elementary school teachers use those resources effectively to teach ELLs. Digital literacy in schools is also not going away. It's a state policy. So in addition to that, we know in 2017, there was that 6.1 decrease in the English language proficiency. ELLs were not making enough progress to achieve state goals. So we need some to know what's happening there. We need to support improvement of achievement in English language proficiency among the tri-state area, especially in elementary schools, because there's still those federal policies of closing the gap in the ELA achievements. We know that ESL classrooms have a diverse group of students with different levels and different styles of learning. It's imperative to keep studying these trends and see what's going on. Because of COVID and the lack of being able to go into detail with my study, I really want to go back and do another study that's a phenomenological study to pinpoint those whys and how this is still happening, why our ELL students are still not where they need to be. I was not able to do that during the pandemic to try to find out. Like I said, I got that exact 6.1% back in 2017, a 6.1% decrease. I wanted to do that, but just could not because I couldn't get the data that I needed in the middle of the pandemic. So I'm hoping to go back and maybe get those exact scores again. But for 2019, and hoping to see the exact percentage of decrease if they're, across the tri-state area. But that's something that we need to do in the future. We need to see also what are the guidelines for the federal policies, what is the effect on the students, depending on how the students are teaching ESL. Are the teachers now proficient enough in digital technology that they can effectively teach ELLs? So all those things are possible topics for future study. Also, we know that we need to keep supporting and training our educators because language arts can affect math, science, social studies, art, music, and even physical education. Believe it or not, ELL goes a long way. So we just need to keep looking at those achievement gaps and closely monitoring what's happening, because there will always be a need for English language learners as migrants continue to move across the world and across states. There's always going to be a need for English language learning because English is the predominant language in the digital world. We know digital is not going away, so we need to increase digital learning. We need to start this at the elementary level to give these students a head start and able to obtain careers in the United States and to hear what's coming in the future. So I want to thank you very much. And if you have any questions, I will now take your questions.
Yes, we have about 1 minute until we need to close. So I'm going to go ahead and end the recording.
Okay.